Have you ever stopped to think about how the ancient practice of tithing, giving a tenth of your crops, has anything at all to do with how we Venmo a donation today? It's kind of wild. The journey from this mandatory agricultural tax to a heartfelt digital transfer is, well, it's a fascinating story, and it tells us a ton about what generosity is really all about. So, let's dive in.
I mean, it sounds like a trick question, right? But believe it or not, the principles behind that ancient grain law are the very same ideas that can and probably should guide how we use our digital wallets today. It really all comes down to understanding the why behind the what.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the huge shift from then to now. Then, we'll dig into the core ideas that actually haven't changed at all. After that, we'll unpack the New Testament's view, which is all about principles, not percentages. And finally, we'll get super practical and talk about how to give wisely in our world today.
All right, first up, let's just look at the nuts and bolts of giving. Because the practical ways people have given over the centuries, well, it's been a massive transformation. It's like night and day.
Yeah, this really sets the stage perfectly for our whole conversation. Over here, you've got the biblical tithe, totally rooted in an agricultural world. And over on the other side, you've got modern giving, with all its digital ease and convenience. We're going to break down exactly how we got from point A to point B.
The first, and let's be honest, most obvious shift is just the economy itself. The biblical tithe was built for a farming society. Your wealth was your land, your grain, your livestock. So naturally, that's what you gave from. Today, our economy is all monetary. We give from salaries, business profits, investment returns. The actual form of our giving has completely changed.
And this, of course, changes the method. Giving used to be a very physical, tangible act. You could see and feel the grain or the animal you were offering. Now, it's often just the click of a button, a digital bank transfer. And while that's super convenient, there's a real risk there, isn't there? The risk of losing that tangible connection, of giving just becoming mechanical instead of intentional.
Finally, the whole context is just completely different. The tithe in ancient Israel wasn't just a donation to a religious group, it was an integrated tax system. It supported the priestly class, the Levites, but it also supported the government and a national welfare system for the poor. It was the whole shebang. Today, our giving is primarily focused within a church context, supporting pastors, missions, and specific charitable work.
So, with all those huge changes in how people give, you might be tempted to think the whole concept is just outdated. But here's the thing. While the methods have totally changed, the motivation hasn't. The core principles, that why behind generosity, are absolutely timeless.
So despite all the external changes, we find these four principles that just keep showing up. They connect that ancient tithe directly to our modern giving, and they all focus on these key ideas: acknowledgement, support, worship, and care. These really are the timeless heart of generosity.
And this first principle is so crucial. Giving has always been, first and foremost, an act of acknowledgement. It's a way of saying, hey, everything I have ultimately comes from God. It's an act of recognition. It's not a payment for services rendered.
And that second principle, it carries through directly. Just like the tithe supported the Levites, who didn't have their own land inheritance, modern giving supports pastors and church workers. The New Testament totally affirms this idea, saying that those who dedicate their lives to ministry should be supported by the community they serve. It makes sense, right?
Okay, this brings us to a really, really important theological shift. The New Testament doesn't just copy and paste the old system. It totally reframes giving. It moves the focus away from a specific legal percentage and puts it squarely on the motivation of the heart.
So to really get the New Testament view, we have to be super clear on what the Old Testament tithe actually was. It was a specific law for a specific nation under a specific covenant. And because our context, our economy, our government, our spiritual life is so different, you just can't mechanically transfer that system to today. So that number, 10%, was the cornerstone of the Old Testament's legal system of giving. It was a very clear, very defined rule for the nation of Israel.
But here it is. Here's the crucial shift, and maybe the biggest takeaway for Christians today. Nowhere in the New Testament are believers commanded to give that specific 10%. The entire focus moves away from a fixed mathematical rule and toward the principles of the heart.
So instead of a flat 10%, the New Testament gives us a framework of principles. It says giving should be proportional to what you have, done willingly and cheerfully, be generous in spirit, and seen as a spiritual act of worship in response to God's grace. It's so much more about the heart than it is about the math.
So what do we do with all this? How do we apply it today? Let's bring it all home and talk about the challenges and, frankly, the opportunities of modern giving.
There are three major pitfalls we really need to watch out for. First, that mechanical giving we talked about. Setting up the auto transfer and just forgetting about it, losing that element of worship. Second is legalism, falling back into the trap of treating 10% like a rigid rule and totally missing the New Testament's emphasis on a willing heart. And third, a big one today, is a lack of transparency, giving without any accountability for how those funds are actually being used.
Ultimately, this is the question we're left with. The Old Testament asked, will you honor God with a tenth of your stuff? But the New Testament goes so much deeper. It reframes the whole conversation. It doesn't ask what percentage you're giving. It asks, how is your generosity a reflection of the incredible grace you've received? And that, right there, is a question worth thinking about long after this explainer is over.